While Kira was suffering, you know what she kept saying to me? Baby, please stay calm. We have to have a candid conversation about the lived experiences of black people, and particularly black men in fatherhood.
I'm so honored to be here. And so for those of y'all who may not be familiar with me, I am Charles Johnson. I'm the founder of 4Cure 4 Moms. 4Cure 4 Moms is a nonprofit organization with one very distinct focus, and that is to eradicate the maternal mortality crisis in the United States, period, full stop. We founded the organization after my wife, Kira, passed away giving birth to our second son, Langston, in 2016. What I did not understand when I walked into that hospital that afternoon is that there would even be a possibility that my wife would not walk out to raise our sons. And so we have a mission to make our country a better, safer place for mothers and babies. With that being said, I have the great honor and privilege to do a lot of really wonderful things as a part of this advocacy work, including testifying on Capitol Hill, sharing Kira's story all over the country. But what I want to start this conversation with this morning is expressing gratitude. Because without the work of many of the brilliant minds in this room, many of which belong to women of color, the work that I do, the policies that we are working on would not be possible. So thank you for all the work that you do. A very special thank you to my sister friend, Dr. Jamila Taylor, for everything that you do, to what you mean to me as a friend, to what you mean to this movement. And so I'm grateful. With that being said, I'm a lot of things. I consider myself a dadvocate. And we're going to have a very special conversation this afternoon with two men that I greatly admire. And so I really want to start, first and foremost, with José. Let's talk just a little bit, both of you all. If you always share with us a little about yourself and how you got to this very important work at the intersection of reproductive justice and gender equity.
Yes, thank you so much for having us. Thank you so much to IWPR for the generosity with bringing us all here together, but also with your generosity with your data. In the past few months, it has made a whole lot of difference for our advocacy in the US. I'm, as you can tell maybe because of my accent, I'm not originally from the US. I was born in Ecuador. I was raised by a feminist activist mother and her group of crazy friends, as a lot of people would want to see them. So for me, working in gender equality, I don't think it was ever an option. I think I was raised into being able to do this. That mobilized me to working and work for a really long time with women-led organizations all over Latin America. Being born a gay brown kid in a country that was quite conservative and where it was illegal to be gay until I was 10 years old, made it so that working with LGBTQI issues was also quite close at heart. And I think that in the space of masculinities, it had a lot to do with my grandfather. My grandfather wasn't the greatest husband, and he really wasn't the greatest dad. But when I was born, my birth coincided with his retirement and coincided with a time where he had to question whether his whole identity that had been built around the idea of being a provider and being what a macho or within an Ecuadorian society, he somehow found purpose through care. And he found purpose through being with me in kindergarten every day and reading stories to every other kid. And I would fight every other kid because they would say that he was grandfather for all. And I was like, no, this is just, he's just for me. But I saw through his lifespan of a guy born in 1920, with very rigid versions and visions of what masculinity was, I saw through his 97 years in this planet, his ability to change, his ability to shift, his ability to move.
Wow.
So those stories around that man that wasn't caring, that wasn't loving, that wasn't great, sounds to me completely foreign. And through his testimony, I think I can attest that when we give men that opportunity to change, there's a potential for growth and for them to become advocates for us all as well.
Absolutely. Jonathan, thank you. Thank you, Jose.
Thank you. My name is Jonathan Webb, and I too would like to thank you, Dr. Jamila Taylor, for all of your work and your friendship and your partnership. And I apologize for my voice. I'm losing it a little bit, but please bear with me. I'm the CEO for A1. We represent and work with the 380,000 nurses around the country in the women's health, obstetric, and neonatal spaces. We advocate on behalf of issues that are dealing with, that women and our nurses deal with. We also provide education and conduct research. That's what I do professionally. Personally, what brings me to this fight in this moment, one is as a grandson of a grandmother who showed me an example of sacrifice, a mother who walked and was an example of what strong female leadership looked like. I come from a two-parent home, but my dad was working a lot, so I saw a different type of family structure because he was literally gone most of the time. So my mom and grandmom were really folks who were kind of in the middle, in the gap there. As a husband of a powerhouse, a rock star, and the father of two children, an 18-year-old son and a 13-year-old daughter. My son is doing great. My daughter might take over the world when it's all said and done. But I grew up in West Philadelphia, and I saw West Philadelphia, born and raised. And I saw in my just upbringing a lot of preventable mortality and morbidity with people that looked like me. I didn't quite have a framing for what I was experiencing because in Philadelphia it's predominantly black, so this just seemed to be the norm. At one point, I was on my way to medical school because I wanted to improve the health of people in the ways providers do. And I fell more in love with public health and policy because I saw the way that social dynamics really impacted people's care and outcomes. So that's kind of what powered my journey. When my wife and I started our journey to having kids, we were originally told we were not going to be able to have children, and we experienced the highs and the lows of that path. We saw some of the bias and the dismissal that providers often give families of color. But we also saw some of the highs with being able to have a successful pregnancy with my son. We had several losses on the way. And what I learned in that process is, as a public health practitioner who understood how you should eat, all of the things, and trying to support a really healthy pregnancy, I didn't really know what advocacy looked like. And there were times with each loss, I felt like if I had listened and prioritized what my wife was saying because she knew her body better than the providers did, we might not have been in the situations that we were in. So she was teaching me how to be a better advocate, and I was able to then apply that into my professional experiences. My son was born healthy. At the age of 6, he was diagnosed with a rare disease. And we were told that he went from being one of the fastest kids in his class to having a difficult time running. His gait was changing, diagnosed with a really rare disease that was causing his immune system to attack his nervous system. And we were told that by the time he was 13, he either, best case scenario, would be ambulatory, he wouldn't be able to walk, or 2, he would not be with us. And my wife went into mommy mode and demonstrated to me what advocacy looked like. So I was able to take the professional experience and that personal experience and marry that to the roles that I'm in now from a public health professional experience to have my purpose, passion, and position to line up to now make sure that others have a better experience than we did, and make sure we can bring forth equitable outcomes. So.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jonathan. So, Jonathan, you and I were together last week, and I've actually seen Jonathan more times over the past 10 days than I've probably seen my own kids. We've been together quite a bit. And so one of the things we talked about a lot is that we're in the midst of what we call the maternal health revolution.
Yeah.
A unique time in history. And so both of you all, if you all would just speak to a little bit about why is this moment in time so important, not only to research, support, but most importantly for men to act on behalf of women and mothers?
So a few quick things. One, I don't think that women's health or maternal health is strictly a women's issue.
There you
I think
go.
we're a team.
There we
and
go.
as partners,
Hey,
we
all
should-
right. Absolutely.
Two, I think that we are in an interesting inflection point in our country's future. I don't know if I've ever seen this much attention and focus on maternal health issues, on reproductive rights, reproductive justice. I don't think I've seen this much attention in our nation's history. I think we have an opportunity to galvanize and show support for that, for each other. The other side of that, though, is we can't acknowledge the fact that, in my opinion, reproductive rights are under attack.
Sure.
Right? So I believe if we don't act right now, this inflection point, this tipping point, could go one or two directions. And if we don't want it to go one direction, we need to make sure we're advocating it for the other direction. The other point that I would make, I don't know if we always bring it to these conversations, is that we are at a space where information is traveling at the speed of light.
There you go.
We're looking at what this AI revolution is going to look like. And I think there's some really strong opportunities for AI, but I think there's also some risk with AI. And if we don't have the right supports, the right research, the right inputs into that AI, we could be perpetuating the same inequitable system just faster.
Absolutely.
So we need to be able to support each other in this inflection point to make sure we're on the right side of history.
And thank you so much for that. So I want to kick it to you, Jose, and that's an excellent point, Jonathan. But Jose, help us understand, how can we help men to see themselves as very important stakeholders in this movement?
Yeah, I think if I actually had the answer for that, gender equality, we could say gender equality is solved and we could all go home, but that's
There we go.
not necessarily it. But I can provide maybe some pathways of what we've experienced. I come from an organization that works in masculinity, so basically we engage with men and young boys as early as 3 years old to try and get them to be better allies for gender equality, but also framing more and more in the conversation in getting them to see that gender equality is also beneficial for them.
Sure.
So I do think that the concept of allyship resonates with some of us. The concept of allyship doesn't resonate with everyone, and therefore we need to start creating new messaging that actually allows us to connect and to break through. We are seeing, I was just in Hong Kong last week, and we're seeing in research there, but in research also in the US, that the population of 18 to 23-year-old men are becoming more and more conservative and more antagonistic to the advancement of feminism. So I think it's crucial for us to reinvigorate the messaging and reinvigorate the work that we do rather than step back. There's been a lot of progress, I'd say, in the space of feminism, but there's a lot more that needs to happen, and if we remain complacent, that next generation is going to take over, and those views that they're spewing or that connection that they're finding in online spaces is going to affect how the work progresses. So yeah, I'd say that on our end, it has to do with the adaptability of the messaging, and it has to do with what we like to say we do all the time, which is call out harm and call out men when they exercise harm, but also call them in whenever we can.
Absolutely. Thank you. And so, speaking of calling them in, I want to just come back to Jonathan. I want to talk about the important role of care providers. You represent hundreds of thousands of labor and delivery nurses all across the country. Can you talk about what A1 is doing and how important it is to reshape care and engage fathers and men in being active stakeholders in the journey towards being parents?
Yeah, I think it's an important question. So one of the things that I've seen sort of evolve in our conversation over the last decade or so, we really talked about and really emphasized the mom-baby dyad, which I think is really important because we understand that there's two parts of the equation. And when we were talking last week on Capitol Hill, one of our colleagues, James Hogue, mentioned that if you're doing algebra and you only focus on one side of the equation but not the other side, then you're kind of doomed to have an improper result. In our conversations with providers, I don't think we ever think about the whole family in the way that we are advocating for in our moments. So the mom-baby diet is very crucial, but also not forgetting the fact that there is a third team member in that equation. So I think that's first and foremost. The second piece is that we've also placed a lot of emphasis on implicit bias training.
Sure.
I don't know how much of the work that we've done in implicit bias training includes provider bias towards father and male involvement in care. So making sure we evolve those implicit bias trainings to include how providers view or see men or male partners in their care. We have seen a lot of organizations who, and A1 has done this, and you saw it on the slide earlier, really focus on, now that we have started to do some of those trainings and people know better how they actually do better.
Yeah.
And there are a number of organizations that are releasing respect for maternity care guidelines. And those respect for maternity care guidelines and toolkits talk about how you engage families in conversations to make sure men don't feel like they're on the outside looking in, make sure that the training that's being focused on, the education on what's happening in the prenatal experience, the birthing experience, also includes men in those conversations, and making sure providers understand and see that. One of the other things that we have tried to do, and this goes back to my comment earlier about AI and tools, when I came to A1 and started engaging with other provider partner organizations, a lot of the trainings that people received in medical settings, they had scenarios that would outline what your typical experience might look like in your providers when you were in clinical settings. And most of the scenarios that I saw, the profiles that I saw for Black and brown folks, had a single mom of 3 on Medicaid, on whatever it might be. And
there was bias even in the
scenarios. So I think those type of, like even going all the way back to your medical education and making sure those scenarios are more representative. The last thing I would say from a provider standpoint is we really need to focus on helping them to be more data driven.
Okay.
So there's been a lot of, recently in the last year or so, focus on prams for dads. Because we need more research, one, on what father experiences are in the clinical settings, but two, their lived experience as well. And there's been prams for moms, but not prams for dads. And there's a number of states who've adopted the pregnancy risk assessment measuring system for dads, but not enough of them have. So the more we get data to better understand what the clinical experiences are for dads, I think the more then we can focus our action towards changing that.
Awesome, thank you. And so, Jose, let's talk about action and taking action, and talk to us just a little bit about what it looks like to mobilize dads, right? And I know with specificity, we're all representing, we got our pins on, Jose has plenty of pins, and Vote Like a Dad, particularly this campaign is something that you all have been really focused on, but talk about what that looks like, some of the challenges, but what success looks like when we talk about mobilizing dads.
Well, I think it's first to have in mind that it's important to engage with men within that conversation. When we created this Vote Like a Dad campaign, it came as a result of IWPR sharing their research with us, which we analyzed, and after a bit, we realized that, care and better care policies make sense for everyone. So there's little to no difference between Democrats and Republicans in the US. Everyone cares about care. So what we decided to do is, taking a cue from the Congressional Dads Caucus that was founded by Congressman Jimmy Gomez, whose first step in that creation was to reach out to the Moms Caucus and say, hey, we're here and we want to do this together and in partnership. For us, it was, okay, let's try and do what women have been doing forever, and it's centering care as a part of their decision-making factor. So the idea of the Vote Like a Dad campaign is not necessarily a crazy insight that needed a lot of development or human-centered design to get us there. It was just us saying, men do care about care, so let's point them towards the candidates and the platforms that are actually offering that or that are putting that on the table. So voting like a dad means voting for accessible childcare in the US. It means voting for paid leave for all, and it means voting for a living wage. It's easy, it's It's very, very hard to find people that wouldn't be able to sign up
Sure.
towards it. It's not necessarily that controversial, but ideally we would want Vote Like a Dad to become whatever people want it to become. So if it has to do with gun violence prevention, if it has to do with any other cause that is centered around these men and these dads saying, I'm here to show up for my families, for my spouse, for my partner, and for my kids. It's a challenge because getting people to understand that men can be competent caregivers is tricky. Not everyone is necessarily there. We created research with the Gina Davis Institute a while back, and we found out that the staple of the American sitcom in the US has to do with an incompetent dad, that when the mom goes out, they struggle to do things at home. Everything becomes a disaster because it's not natural for them to care. We need to resignify what doing things like a dad and doing things like a man mean. Doing things like a man has meant for a really long time to do them with aggression, to do them with violence even. We want to say that doing things like a man can be doing them with kindness, doing them with love. And what if we as in Equimundo and in my role as director of advocacy believe that it is, yes, about moving policy, but it's also, and first and foremost, about moving people, their perceptions and their practices. Because if that doesn't happen, then we see regression of rights, like what happens here now, but like what happens everywhere else. So there's a playbook that the other side, as some people may call them, has, and there's a concerted effort that they have for that regression of rights, and maybe we need to take a cue from them and design this not-so-secret cabal with our not-so-secret agenda, and have care be the rallying point around it.
No, I love that. That's amazing. And so you said something powerful about that sitcom and how the messaging of fathers is really in the fabric of American society. And so Jonathan, how do you feel that that perception of the way fathers show up and perceived has evolved? And because I feel that's one of the things we need. We need transformative, a generational shift. And how have you seen that? Do you think that we have gone far enough, and what can we do to further really redefine what fatherhood and what masculinity looks like in the United States?
Yeah, I mean, I do think there's a lot more that can be done, but there has been a generational shift. I think you talked about it, Jose, about your grandfather, and I grew up with that image of this was men's work, this was women's work, dad wasn't engaged, mom did all of the work. And I think, and what I've seen just anecdotally, is a lot of challenging of the toxic masculinity culture, where the distribution of labor, so to speak, is more equitable and more fluid, where you have dads who are excited and interested and wanting to get more engaged and be more involved. You have some CDC research of a report of 2013 that talked about the shifting of male engagement even in 2013 from what it was 20, 30, 40 years ago. So there are a lot more dads who are wanting to be involved in everyday activities of their kids, care and feeding. And I've seen that in my circles and in my travels. I think the other part of the conversation that we need to talk about, and it's personal to me, is that black fathers also get a bad rep in conversations as well. And excuse me, and in my travels in boardrooms and in communities, I see dads who are actively trying to be more engaged and wanting to be involved in their kids' lives. So making sure we have structures and conversations that allow them to do that. In that same CDC study, it talked about how black fathers are actually more engaged than their white counterparts and Hispanic counterparts. And not to say the other counterparts weren't engaged, but on that scale, black fathers are actually more engaged in feeding kids, taking kids to ball games, doing homework, all those kind of things. So I think we need to do more to reframe that narrative, because those are the types of data points that providers, that communities see, and perpetuates that same harmful narrative that fathers are incompetent in the background and not wanting to be more engaged. I think the more we can do that, the better off we'll be, and be able to position people as partners and not problems.
Awesome.
Because I think one of the things we do is we try to Jose's point, we try to work around dads in conversations instead of working with them.
There you go. So, amazing, thank you. So let's stay there a little bit, Jose, and talk just a little bit about the State of American Men report,
Yeah.
right? And if you would just, it's such powerful research. I think one of the key points I want us to understand is this just isn't about reaching current fathers. This is about how we set the stage for fathers to be. So if you could just share with us some of the key findings from the report and what some of the takeaways are and how we create pathways for fathers to be and how it's redefined.
Yeah, I joined Equimundo last year, and when I joined, there was two big pieces of research that we were putting out. The first one was the State of the World's Fathers, which collects data from Chile to China, 17 countries, and it was incredibly hopeful. Men were saying and reporting to do more care work across the world. The pandemic, which had been tragic and horrific for us all, had allowed them to see the opportunity that they could actually enjoy their time with their kids. It wasn't a burden necessarily. There was the possibility of finding joy within those spaces. So just coming into the organization, I was incredibly happy and saying, okay, this in the midst of everything that's happening in the world, this gives us some light and some idea that there's the potential for change and growth. At the same time, we released a report called The State of American Men, which focused not on the state of fatherhood, but of masculinity in the US. And within that report, we found a drastic contrast. So especially for 18 to 23-year-old men in the US, we found that 2/3 of them were reporting and saying that they hadn't had any interaction with anyone outside of their household in the last 2 weeks. That none of them had any meaningful connection outside of the ones that they would have in their household. 4 out of 10 were saying that they had suicidal ideation thoughts in the last 2 weeks. And most of them were reporting that their online lives were a lot more meaningful than their offline lives. So for us, it created a clear contrast between those who were finding purpose through care and those who were not finding purpose through care. That same population of 18 to 23-year-olds were saying that they found that radical influencers were more trustworthy than their government officials. They were also saying and detailing why that they felt that they were the victims of the advancements of feminism. For us, that created a clear question. How do we then engage with these men? With Equimundo, and for 20 years as an organization born in the Global South, we have been saying fatherhood is a powerful vehicle. When we talk about like healthy masculinities, a lot of people don't understand what that is. Toxic ones, people have a clear idea. Yeah. But healthier ones, it's very hard. And sometimes we feel like, and my other hat is director of comm, so I tend to feel that sometimes I'm like selling smoke, and it's like, you can be everything, and it's about new ones. And the Tates of the world have a clear roadmap of what masculinity should look like. There's steps to get to there. There's steps to success. We don't have that. So fatherhood has been very, very helpful because, well, you cannot understand maybe what a healthier masculinity is. It's easier to understand what it means to be a better dad. For these 18 to 23-year-olds, that's not on the table. They're not finding purpose through care because they feel that no one cares. There's a clear crisis of connection, and for a really long time we dismissed that crisis of connection because we fall in that trap of playing the zero-sum game. Within that crisis of connection, what we're saying now is, yes, a lot of these men are going online and are looking for romantic relationship, are looking to try to escape poverty. So there's a lot of concern, a lot of the Google searches have to do with how do I become rich and fast. Wow. There's a lot of trying to look better and personal development. Within the manosphere, there's this concept of looks maxing. So how do I go into practices like breaking my jaw to try to make it more masculine? Because there's a rigid version of what I need to look like. They're trying to they're trying to vent, they're trying to make friends, and that is not necessarily happening. What we are trying to do right now is design clear pathways that could help us connect to those men for whom the idea of allyship or the idea of fatherhood doesn't work. What we're saying is, let's provide healthier connection to the one that they're finding. A lot of the searches start with, how do I find love? And the problem is not the search. The problem is that the answer devolves very quickly in how do I manipulate a woman into being with me? So what we need to do is interrupt those cycles of violence within the spaces. We're partnering up with Futures Without Violence in the US, with organizations that are very, very cool, like Diverting Hate, that are women-led, and that are saying, how do we use data, how do we use AI to go into these spaces? If they are saying that they find more meaningful connection or more meaningful lives online, how do we go into those online spaces and meet them where they're at?
Yeah, it's powerful. And I think that, you know, what you touch on is it's this notion that in a world that seems that we're more connected than ever, people really are lonelier than ever, right? And feeling isolated. And I think that's brilliant that you all are taking that approach. And so, John, let's talk just a little about, for both of you all, I really want us to understand what success looks like. What does this look like? And so, you know, starting with you, Jonathan, talking about inclusivity. How are care providers and family structures changing, opening up new conversations? And how are systems and structures finding pathways for success for all families?
Yeah, so there are a number of things I've seen that are encouraging. So as I mentioned before, from a system perspective, having more data like the Prams for Dad piece to identify and better understand what lived experiences look like, I think having that data is a success. And then being able to build resources and supports based on what you're hearing from dads. I also have the privilege to work with a number of medical boards. And I actually sit on the American Board of Pediatrics, and consequently I'm going to the American Board of Medical Specialties meeting tomorrow here in Chicago to talk about public member engagement, because my work on that group is as a public member, not as an A1 or public health professional. And the reason why I bring that up is because there are a lot of medical organizations like that that are really prioritizing public family and lived experiences. So when they're building out what their board certification looks like, when they're building out their medical education, when they're building out a legislative or policy agenda, educational products or services or resources, there's a really intentional focus on making sure lived experiences are at the table. So having that continue, and more organizations, more boards, more medical institutions, more providers doing that, I think is important. One of the things that the American Board of Pediatrics did is also build a little bit of a crosswalk. So when providers are looking at what the training says, there's a crosswalk that actually ties the training back to the action. And the public members who are part of that process can help to make sure that whatever the crosswalk says is actually something the patient feels as being a different experience. So it's not just a provider saying, well, the certification standards say or competency says this, and here's what the action looks like. You have a person who's been with or been on the other side of that care to say, this is actually what it feels like, and here's how you actually make this stick. So I've seen a lot of that. I have seen providers take a little bit more effort to build trainings educations into the prenatal experience to make sure that fathers understand exactly what's happening in the birthing experience so they can then be advocates. I've also seen a number of health systems who are building mentoring programs and fatherhood training programs. So, like I lived in Chicago for 10 years and had the benefit of going to UIC's. UIC had a program 18 years ago where it took me and a number of other new fathers and taught us how to swaddle, taught us how to change diapers, taught us how to feed, how to support breast. So I've seen more of those type of programs that are out there. So to me, success looks like more of that, more data, more engagement, more mentoring, more normalizing father engagement, helping fathers to feel more like advocates in those spaces, and then having reimbursement platforms for doulas and others to be part of those conversations to make sure that we have those supports.
So, you know, Jose, I want to talk just a little about this notion of responsible allyship. And so for me, I know that as I entered this space of reproductive justice, of birth equity, as a man, that was one of the things that was and still is very important to me, is how do we show up as responsible allies? And I know oftentimes as a black man or a man of color, we don't understand that still as men, we wield a certain amount of privilege. And so can you just talk to us a little bit about, because what I've kind of experienced when I have these conversations with men and fathers is that we want to show up, we want to be engaged, and we want to practice responsible allyship. So talk to us just a little bit about what that looks like and how we can empower men to show up, but show up in a way that is responsible as allies.
I think it's pretty easy. It has to do about doing everything in partnership. When I was telling the story about the creation of the Dads Caucus, Representative Tlaib was the founder of the Moms Caucus, and she was the first one to join the Dads one. And she always teases and says, we were doing this before and no one was paying that much attention. When the men showed up, everyone was saying, oh yeah, they're here. But the idea is, it's not an instead of, it's both of them and both of those caucuses and sharing the journey together. When we created the campaign, the first thing that we did was reach out to Moms First, Moms Congress, Chamber of Mothers, and a lot of other women-led organizations to say, how can we do this in tandem? We don't intend to do it alone. Right now on Equimundo's end, we are designing the first global summit around fatherhood, caregiving, and equality to be hosted in Rio de Janeiro in 2026. And we just came out of a conversation with the organizers from Women Deliver, because we don't want this to be either us or them. We want this to be an end. We see ourselves and our organization as the end to the work that is already happening and that all of you are doing. And just to echo maybe the previous question, I think that for me, a +1 on everything that you said, but for me, success looks like this. It's this room with a diversity of voices and a diversity of faces that continue to leverage all of our collective power for societal change.
As we bring this conversation to a close, what can each person here today do to improve care for and support mothers?
So I would say first, being able to have these types of open and honest conversations. I think starting these conversations is really extremely important to help us to normalize what we're talking about in terms of dads being able to support moms. I think the other part of this, and Jose, you kind of teed this up a little bit, as dads coming into this space, I do believe that we are part of a team, but I don't want to be, I have to be careful about how I come into the space as a male, because my wife has a very different experience in the birthing experience and the perinatal process. So me coming in with the right mindset and supporting other men as they come into the mindset that we are advocates, we are allies, but we are not taking over the conversation.
Absolutely.
So we need to partner. We need to make sure that we are invited in, and make sure that we are leading from behind in some respects, and making sure that we're able to elevate and support the women and the birthing people in our lives in a respectful way, and having the right mindset that allows us to do that. So I think if we support dads and anyone who wants to come into the space in that way, then we'll be able to collectively move the needle.
Awesome.
I'd say we can do that, but in this crucial moment in this country, it's an election year around the globe. There's something like 60 major elections happening in the whole planet. And so I'd say vote like a mom and vote like a dad. Look for those who are willing to fight for you. That's, I think, the best thing that we can do right now.
Absolutely. Awesome. Jonathan, Jose, thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for listening to us.